I tell you what my plan is when I turn like 60? Because I'm really healthy. I'm going to buy a motorcycle and ride it without a helmet.
And adopt a bunch of cats.
No! Hello, and welcome to another episode of JavaScript Jabber, as Chris would say.
Oh, come on!
Okay, JavaScript Jabber. And today we are going to talk about pair programming with the panelists. We have AJ O'Neill.
Yo, yo, yo. This is Solder.js coming at you live from sunny Provo, Utah.
And Chris Ferdinandi.
Hey, it's the Vanilla.js guy.
And I'm going to kind of be carrying us along today. And I'm Aimee Knight.
This episode is brought to you by Triplebyte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume, you spend hours and hours on the phone screens and take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your application. Well, if you're a software engineer, Triplebyte can help. They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you go straight to final interviews with the company on their platform. It's like the Common App for software developers. Triplebyte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code. I've helped dozens of software developers with various credentials get jobs, and this looks like a terrific way for you to get in and get interviewed and get a job without a lot of the hassle and overhead. You can go check them out at triplebyte.com/JSJabber. That's triplebyte.com, byte as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through Triplebyte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus.
So where do we want to start with this? I know I would like to talk about pairing at work, pairing in interviews, the good, the bad.
We got to start with defining pairing because this is something that means different things to different people. Like there's formal pairing processes that have like acronyms that, like the TDD type things. And then there's, what was it? PDD, pair driven, and then there's casual pairing. So first of all, let's talk about what is pairing? What are the types of pairing?
Yeah. So for me, I say pairing, which is probably less formal. But for me, pairing is I am sitting down or standing up, whatever, at my computer, and I have something in front of me that I need to do. And there's like two of us looking at it together. That could be, it could even be like a bug that you maybe have like been looking at for a while and can't seem to make progress on. And so you pull in somebody else to kind of look at it with you. But I think the more formal definition, and we did this in our boot camp, and I think we did it in the JavaScript portion too, but definitely I feel like it's really popular in other programming language communities like Ruby, but where somebody writes the failing test and then you pass over the keyboard to the other person and they write the code to make it pass.
Ooh.
So that's what it is to me. I love pairing, but we can get into that later. I'm curious what y'all's definitions of it are.
Well, I actually have a question about your definition right out of the gate, Aimee. So, you kind of mentioned the whole you're standing there, sitting there with someone, kind of working together. And maybe we table this, AJ and I share our definitions, but I'd be really curious to hear more about what that looks like for folks who are remote, especially teams that are partially remote or even like companies that are fully remote. Like how does that work? What does that fundamentally look like?
I think for me too, at this point, I've probably worked remote more than I have in an office.
Same.
And I love being remote, but usually, like when I was at WB, we use Screen Hero a bunch where both people can control the screen. At NPM, we use Zoom and you can't control the other person's screen, but like truly at that point, one person will drive and share their screen so other people can see. I've also done, this like deviates a little bit from your question, but I should have added it earlier. Sometimes to me, pairing, there's like one person, it's hard to tell who's doing more of the work, the person who's actually at the keyboard, or sometimes in a sense, like if I've seen like super junior people where the more senior person is kind of like telling them what to do, but having the junior do it rather than them doing it. And I feel like that's really valuable for a newer programmer because you're going through the motions rather than just having like the senior take over. But anyways, back to being remote. Yeah, you could do Screen Hero where you share or just one person like drives and shares their screen.
Yeah, so I think that, that's what I do most is when I'm pairing. I pair locally and I pair remote. I find a lot of value in the rubber duck style pairing where you're stuck on a problem. You've been working on it for 15 minutes on your own. You know that it shouldn't be this hard. You're missing something. You grab a buddy and you say, hey, do you mind just, sitting with me? You're kind of familiar with this code base a little bit, or even if you're not familiar with this code base a little bit. And let me just explain what my logic is and what I'm thinking and tell me if you see anything wrong. And so often, a problem that, I think it's good to pull somebody in if you're sitting at a problem for 15 or, somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes and you haven't solved it. I think it's good to pull somebody in. Don't let it go to an hour or 2 hours, because most likely.
So agree with that.
You pull that person in and then within 5 minutes, it's going to be done. But if you did that every time you were stuck on a 15-minute problem, you'd be bothering people all day long.
Yeah.
But I think it can be really good for that. And then I also enjoy the longer sessions of kind of just keeping a line open where you're working on something, the other person's working on something. Maybe you've got a shared TMUX or a shared screen session going on, as well as you've got the audio and possibly a screen share as well. So you can both type a little bit. You can be like, oh, wait, I need to go do this. I need to do it over here. Oh, wait, I think you missed it here. You can get that live feedback where you can kind of go back and forth between, okay, I'm going to work on this part of it. Say I'm going to work on the test, for example. Okay, I'm going to work on the thing that's going to pass the test, then come back together, debug it together. I don't know that I would really enjoy the formal pairing so much, but that very fluid style of pairing I find to be incredibly valuable, especially when it comes to user experience. Because as somebody that is a little bit more senior, when I'm pairing with someone who's a little bit less senior, and I get to see the way that they think about something, the way that they approach something, it helps me to then understand oh, this is what the documentation should look like. And here's how the API is broken from a user experience perspective. The API should be different, or these should be named differently. That kind of stuff I find extremely valuable.
Absolutely. I see this all the time with, I run this JavaScript training program thing. And one of the pieces of it is office hours where we review projects and things like that. And kind of what you just described, where stuff that was obvious to me because I've been working with it for a little while and is less obvious for my students, is just so eye-opening. One of the things, AJ, Aimee, I want to ask both of you. So when I've done pair programming as a junior and I've worked with more senior people, it usually gets approached one of a couple of different ways. One of them that I think we already mentioned is where, someone more senior directs you on what to do. I know there's also the style where you could watch someone who's more senior actually complete the work. One of the styles I personally found most useful for my own learning, though, was I remember once being really stuck on this terrible bug, and this senior developer in our team, she came over and rather than telling me the answer, she just kept asking questions to kind of help me dig deeper into it myself and eventually get there. And it took her way longer than it would have otherwise to just give me the answer.
That's so valuable.
I learned so much more. And so, AJ, Aimee, in your opinion, what's the right balance there? When do you use that approach? When do you just kind of give people the answer or let them watch? How do you find that right mix?
I've had to do this in interviews too, when you're interviewing someone, because you want to see how far they can get, which is kind of difficult. But I would say optimally, you would be pairing with someone who would be aware enough of their own limitations that they would be able to speak up when they were stuck. But if that wasn't the case, I don't know, part of me thinks I would almost wait for the person to say they're stuck, even if there's a spectrum there and some people are going to probably ask for help sooner than others. But if it's a person who is going to wait to ask for help, I almost would rather wait for them to ask than to step in, because I feel that's a valuable lesson to learn when to ask. Because on the flip side of that, if somebody asks too soon and I feel they potentially they're not super struggling, I might say I don't know, I wouldn't fully step in. I would just try to figure out a teeny tiny tip to give them and just be I think you're really close. Try this one thing. I don't know. It's hard.
It is really hard to do as a senior developer. I run into this with my students where I just want to if you see them struggling, that them figuring it out themselves is going to help them really retain it so much better. But you just want to jump in and be like, but just do this. It's so, it's right there. But those learning moments really come from going through the struggle yourself, I think.
I totally agree on the point of learning points. So I'm more of a monster. I'm a little less empathetic. But I'm a pragmatist. So I think that when that time comes really depends on the relationship. Like if you are functioning as a teacher, I think it's different than when you're functioning as a coworker or when you're working on open source projects together. Because like for me, so I'm just going to take the example of open source. 90% of your time dealing with people in open source is completely wasted. Because mostly what they want to do is say, hey, I've got some weird edge case where I'm doing this thing and what I want doesn't work and I want you to fix it for me. And I don't want to pay you and I don't want to look at the code, right? Now, if you get as far as pair programming with somebody, they're not that bad, right? But I like to be a little more tough on the one end. If it's open source, like make sure that person's willing to dig a little bit because I want to help them solve their problem, even though it's not my problem, but I don't want to get sucked into their problem, right? Like I want to help them help the community at large. And that's different than, so I might give more straightforward answers rather than just saying, oh yeah, just dig through the code to find this. If they've demonstrated a little bit, they're willing to go at all, like a little bit of tough love up front. But if they demonstrate like, yeah, they're willing to go a little bit at all, then I want to help them quickly because I want them to have that emotional feeling of return of value. Like, okay, I did a little bit of work. I got a little bit of value. I feel good. I want to try this again. I want to get them hooked. It's like cocaine. You play hard to get, be like, no, I'm not giving you any of this. But once they take it and they like it, you're like, all right, just take more and more and more.
The other thing that's super valuable too, I think, if you're able to do it is if time allows, let the person who's stuck step away for a little bit, maybe like have them ponder it and they're self-conscious overnight and see if they're unstuck in the morning.
That's valuable too, for sure.
Well, so we can keep talking about this, but in a minute too, I want to get to, like, in y'all's experience, the code quality that comes out of pairing. Because I think now we're talking about it more as how valuable it is to the individual, but I want to make sure we talk about how valuable it is to like the business or the code base, that sort of thing.
Well, I've got a train that's going and it's not off track yet.
Keep going.
Totally noted. I want to get around to that too because so if it's a working situation, you have to gauge some of the business value. Like you're investing in someone and you want to get a return on that investment. So you have to gauge kind of their level of experience and where they're at and like what roles they're going to be fulfilling. And there's the emotional aspect where you want to make sure that the person feels included and da-da-da-da-da. And then there's the pragmatic aspect of how important is it for this feature to get completed sooner rather than later. And, you want to help people get familiar with the code base because you have a few more people over a section of code, you're going to get it done faster, work value is going to increase. But I would say I'd probably be a little bit quicker in the workplace to help get the person to the right answer because, I mean, it's a balance, but I think that there's a little bit more we want to produce this feature according to the policies that are in place. It's not as exploratory, and by not policy per se, but like, code style and patterns and whatnot. And so you want some exploration, but you want the person to also become familiar with the way things are done. And then I'd say, I don't remember what the third thing I mentioned was, but I would just say a variation of what I've already said. It's just about, to me, it's just about what the relationship is, what the investment that you're putting in, you're trying to get out of. Is it friendship? Is it business value? Is it community? And kind of gear things so that you align as much as you can and be okay with a little bit of waste. Because if you aren't, then you're just going to be a D-bag and no one's going to like you.
I got to be honest, AJ, I was not expecting that ending.
Turns out, Chris, that's what happens when you behave that way. People don't like you.
Can I also bring up another thing before we talk about the code base that is a little bit related to what we're talking about right now?
Yes. Yeah, you can. You are in control.
What about, have you guys ever heard of mob programming?
Yes.
No. Tell me more.
Maybe we should change the word because it sounds super aggressive. But We did a little bit of this at NPM, like, and maybe my definition is different from y'all. So AJ, I'd be curious about yours. But to me, mob programming is like you get more than 2 developers together to tackle a problem. I tend to be a little bit less sure of the value of this to the business. It's, to me, super valuable to the engineers, but I don't know how valuable this is to the business because I feel like it's easy to get distracted. Whereas like pairing one-on-one, it's not as easy to get distracted. But so mob programming, I don't know, like I've seen it if you have like a super tough bug or like something on call and something goes down and you're trying to just get as many eyes on it as possible. And I don't know, that's kind of interesting too, because it's a delicate shuffle of like people need to know when to be quiet and let the people who seem to be most aware of what's going on drive, and like you need to let them focus. And if you have like a bunch of people on the call, it can get hard. But I don't know. I haven't seen mob programming done except for like more complex code.
So I want to enter into this first with a controversial anecdote to what I was talking about previously that kind of leads into this. So there's also situations where you really don't want to pair program. You need to get something done, and the other person is their time they're exploring is both A, beneficial for them on their own, and B, less costly, and C, is going to lead to other objectives that are more important getting completed first, because there are problems where, like, it's the mythical man month. You hire someone new, they don't know enough yet. You've got two choices. You've got to train them, which hopefully if you're hiring someone, you're not during a crunch. Because if you are during a crunch, it's a terrible time to hire. You're just going to slow things down. But then there's times when you need to train, and there's times when you need to focus on what's going to bring the value the soonest. And you just kind of say, actually, we can't pair right now. You're just going to struggle through this, and it's going to be hard. But it's more valuable for me to spend this next hour getting this goal done than it is for me to stop and help you get something done in 5 minutes that's otherwise going to take you 2 hours. It's okay to waste the 2 hours right now. Like, that's legit. Business is, and it's not, I mean, it doesn't even take away from the person necessarily. They still get exploration. They just may not get that reward as quickly as they would like. And then once that time is passed and that objective is met, then you can, you should switch, and you shouldn't always be that way. But sometimes it's okay to, in my opinion, it's okay to be that way. So with mob programming, I think the most important time for mob programming where it brings business value is any time that you would be having a meeting and it turns into vote by committee. Because that's when, if you switch to mob programming, if instead of saying like, oh, well, the API should look like this, or the API should look like that, or this data structure is what we're probably going to need. If you just get someone sitting in front of the keyboard and start prototyping it right then and there, you can clear up so much miscommunication, because code is easy to understand. It's discrete. Words are not easy to understand. And even the whiteboard is something, because all the whiteboard is just boxes with squiggles on them. It makes you feel like you're talking about the same thing, but it doesn't mean you necessarily are. When the code's there, you understand exactly what's going on. So I'm a huge proponent of basically prototyping mob programming, and it doesn't even need to be real code. It's probably best just to do pseudocode. But that is where you can get everybody's ideas on the table. You can get people aligned and on the same page and really drive a lot of value.
I can see the value of that, but I'm also like kind of my spidey senses are tingling. Like I admit I've never done this, and obviously AJ, you have, so tell me to sit down and shut up. But I would be worried about two things. The first is prototype code that's really not fit for production moving into production, because if you write the code, people will try to ship it. Coupled with you've gone from like almost, or it sounds like you're going from design by committee to like develop by committee, and I'm not. Just at face value, having never gone through it, I'm not convinced that that's necessarily better. But again, I totally agree with what you're saying about code sometimes being clearer. I went through this recently where like there was a lot of back and forth on how something should work, and I threw together a quick prototype that I shared with people. And once they saw something working, they're like, oh yeah, I get it now. So I totally, I agree with you on that value. I'm having a tough time, I guess, grokking how having more than a couple of people working on the same thing simultaneously would like work in any manner of efficiency.
Well, I think it's it's the alternative to the worst inefficiency. So I don't disagree with your points at all. In my experience, the kind of stuff that I've done where there was multiple people, it was pseudocode. It didn't turn out to be real code. It was more pseudocode. But it took us away from talking about problems and hypotheticals to moving towards a solution. And that gave us focus.
That is so important.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would not suggest that mob programming be like something you should plan on doing once a week. I mean, I don't know if somebody else, I don't have that kind of experience with it. And the things I'm considering of mob programming, I don't think other people in the room necessarily would have considered it that way. It's just like, I tried to drive things from, okay, we are out in the weeds. We need to focus. If I can get a Word doc up that we can each see on our laptop and people that are on the call can see, and we can start pseudocoding, we're going to get focused and we're going to be productive. Because, when you get more people involved, the more nodes there are in the network, exponentially, you're increasing the complexity of communication in the network. And so when multiple people really do need to be involved, I just see it not as necessarily a good that you should strive for, but as a less evil that can help you get on the right path. And not that I'm saying it's evil, just that.
No, that makes sense though. Thanks for clarifying.
Aimee, did you have something else to say in that vein?
No, not on that. Do we want to talk about like the code base now and the business?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is part that I feel pretty strongly about pairing wise is I do feel that it is really valuable for the code base and the business in general. And I wish so much that organizations would realize the benefit in it. Like, I think there is obviously a cost you pay up front because you have two people working on the same problem. And I'm specifically talking about pairing. I don't feel as strongly about mob programming, at least in regards to this, but the code is usually so much cleaner, easier to build off of in the future. The code review process is almost like built in so that when you do have to put up a PR for code review, it goes by super fast because you're just like doing that as you go. I think it helps you kind of like, for me, whenever I'm working on something a little bit complex, it's almost like I have like a stack in my brain and there's only so much that I can put on it at one time. And I might have to I don't know, it like lets you spawn off another process because if you need to go look at the API of something, the other person can do that while you're able to stay focused on the same context, and it enables you to go faster that way and stay engaged into the problem without having to step away and then, go back down. So I just think it's beneficial on so many levels. I'll let other people weigh in.
I would definitely argue for the business value of pair programming. Again, I don't know, as a methodology, on Tuesdays, we pair program. I think that might be good to get people used to it and to see the benefits of it, more of a training cost type of thing. But I think that pair programming should happen naturally between people that work in the same scope of work and that have, camaraderie and trust, because it's in the open source world. I think it's something that will naturally develop with the people that you're friends with and that you trust. And I think in the business environment, it takes a degree of trust to be vulnerable because, I think it does take a degree of vulnerability to expose your stupidity and your mistakes and whatnot. And that has to be, I don't think I've ever been in a place where that's not culturally appropriate. But I could imagine that there probably are places out there where that historically hasn't been culturally appropriate. And if that's the case, I could see something standardized as part of a policy change to be hey, we're changing our culture. It is okay to be dumb. It is okay to have done stupid things that you're not proud of in code. And so, but I just think there's a ton of business value that really you're not wasting two people's time to get one person's job done. Unless it's one of those times, like I mentioned before, where the priorities are such and one person just needs to waste their time. I think in the general case, it's going to deliver more business value for fewer dollars and fewer hours than otherwise. And you brought up, derailing a little bit, you brought up something that I wanted, that caused me to think. So another type of pair programming, working on different problems in the same scope of work. So like you're working on the UI, maybe mostly the CSS and HTML, and I'm working mostly on the JavaScript. And I say, okay, I've got the little debouncer ready. Do you have the little widget ready or something like that? That might be a little too close because maybe you're even working on stuff in the same file in a situation like that. It could be you're working on the front end JavaScript, I'm working on the back end JavaScript or Go or Ruby or whatever. And so you get a cadence of like, hey, I've completed task A, B, and C. I'm now ready for your part that's going to test those and confirm that they're working as expected. I'm going to go work on part D while I wait for you to catch up. And you can leapfrog each other back and forth. And throughout the day, you could sync up, maybe around lunchtime or whatever. And then, so you do a little bit of more of that idea of keeping the line open, where you're working on something that's similar in the same scope of work. You're working mostly separately, but you've got a line open to each other to quickly communicate and get that feedback loop tight and accurate.
That feels like that would work really well for remote teams where people are located in different time zones too. Like, if you have a East Coast and West Coast development teams, or some folks in the US and over in like Europe or India, or, it gets a little harder when you're literally like complete opposite, like it's 12 midnight while it's 12 noon or whatever. But I like that approach, AJ.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. And I think going back to open source, if you've got an open source project and you're struggling with, if you are fortunate enough that it's popular at all to where you're actually getting people commenting on things, I would definitely highly recommend pair programming with people, because you've got the different time zones, you've got the different cultures, you have nothing in common other than that you've got some code you both have interest in. And I just started this, but I've started kind of making it a policy that if somebody actually seems like they want to contribute, I want to pair with them so that we have FaceTime with each other, and so that we can go through code base. And I know that it's not going to be super productive, that like maybe 2 lines of code will change, but I'm hoping, it'll prepare them to actually be a meaningful contributor where they feel like they got value, and I feel like I got value, and that it was worth my time, rather than just having the comments go back and forth and then end up with, they didn't understand me or thought what I wanted was too stringent, which I don't think that's usually the case with me, or, whatever.
Aimee, one of the things you mentioned that I was kind of curious about, you said that in your experience, pair programming results in code that's, I forget the exact phrasing you used, but something along the lines of like either more logical or more like well-formed.
Yeah.
What do you think about pair programming leads to that?
So there's multiple things, like especially I think as you get more and more senior, if you have 2 seniors trying to look at something, you're going to get, I feel like, a solution that is more, more generic. Whereas I think a lot of times people, as they get stronger, start to become a little more like stylistic about their code, which is, if you're on a large team, is not a good thing. And so there's that. There's, you just have like the built-in of like, when I'm naming something, this person is right next to me. Does the name make sense to them? I don't know. It's like, it's just always valuable to have a second opinion, I think, at least for me. I definitely, when we're ready to, I have some good stories on like pair programming gone wrong.
So I would love to hear that. I want to edge another thing in on this topic. I've found that pairing with juniors has been helpful for me. And I mentioned this before, but just because it helps you to focus on user experience. And I think user experience, unfortunately, in today's buzzword topia, has become something that people think is associated with UI and pixels, which it is completely not. And if you are conflating those two, you are creating terrible experiences that I hate. And I see them all the time. People are like, I'm a great UX person. Look at this UI. It's like, it is pretty in the way that a flower is pretty. It is also functional in the way that a flower is functional.
UX has a lot to do with performance and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah. So I think that UX is something, to me, UX is a mindset that you have throughout your product, from the UI down to the database, and UX should drive decisions, and pairing helps you see other people's perspectives and helps drive good UX. I have a buddy that I love pairing with. I'm going to be completely honest, and he listens to the show, so hopefully he doesn't get offended. He is not an excellent programmer, and I don't think that he ever will be, but I think he's okay with that because his goal is to get crap done, and he is amazing at being able to solve his problems. They're not the way that an experienced coder would solve them, but working with him really helps me to dumb things down and keep them simple. And I try to keep things stupid and simple, but occasionally, probably more than occasionally, I get clever. And in pairing with him, it helps me realize, like, I'm being clever here, and I don't need to be. This could be simpler. And I really, really appreciate that. And it improves the quality of my code, and it improves my ability to reach community. And that's all I had to say on that. So we can move on to your story if you want.
Cool. Yeah, so then I've had like the case of just like pairing gone wrong multiple ways. Like, I think the most challenging for me has been, I was in a situation once where I was working with someone, and I would say we were pretty close to the same level, and we paired for a good solid couple of months, like was like on the calendar to do this like once a day. And I ended up driving like probably 90% of the time, and it was making me a bit frustrated.
So driving, you mean the technical term driving in pair programming?
Yeah, like, so I was the one like at the keyboard typing, leading, and I wanted
I thought driving was the one that spoke and the typer was not the driver.
I've seen it, yeah, so I've seen it like done both ways.
Okay.
Where, yeah, there's like the person who is just typing and the other person is kind of like saying what to do. And that's more, I think, of a situation when it's more of like a junior senior thing, and the senior has like a lot of the knowledge and they're communicating that to the junior who's actually typing. But this was a case where we were like both at the same level, and my personality tends to be like very focused, and like we have pairing time on the calendar, like let's get to it. And so the other person was not quite as focused. Like they were very, like they were knowledgeable and good and knew what they were doing, but not quite as motivated per se. I don't know if that's the right word to use. Not quite as focused, I think, would be the best word to use. Like they could kind of get off topic easily. And so I don't know, like I had to go to my manager a little bit to like not throw someone under the bus, but just ask like advice about how I can help the other person to be more focused, because I just always felt like I was the one doing all of the work most of the time. So I'd be curious, like, how would y'all handle that? Have you ever been in a situation like that? I don't know, like I started getting a little resentful, which is not, I don't know.
That's why I hated team projects in high school.
Yeah, I did feel like a team project. Like, I don't know. And like when we were pairing, and this was remote, like I don't think they were really paying attention. And so I was like, if I'm going to like do all this, I'd rather just like stop sharing my screen and do it myself. I don't know. It was frustrating.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
So I've had experiences pair programming where it's been like that on either side, like where I haven't been focused or the other person hasn't been so focused. And I feel like a lot of the time, the reason that happens is like very natural, and that the reason for pair programming has exhausted itself. And so the focus is drifting elsewhere. Like so let's say, for example, that you had decided artificially that you're going to pair program together for an hour. The problem that you need help solving might only take 15 minutes, and then you're just kind of doing some mundane things that are really one-sided think work. And so if you try to keep pair programming when the context of the task has shifted mentally where the focus needs to be, I think it's the responsibility to call that out and say, hey, I don't feel like the two of us is really productive on this task anymore. I'd like to go back and work on my task in this realm. If you're comfortable continuing on in this task from here, because it seems like you are, and I'd love to check back in an hour or two and like get a review of the progress and understand how things are going, and keep a line open if there's any problems during the time forward. To me, that is the right approach when you're starting to feel like either you or the other person is losing focus. Just draw it out and label it. Do you think that would have worked in your situation, or do you think your situation is just like being irresponsible or something?
I don't know. I think it was more of like the person, it was a complicated situation. I actually know a little bit more to the backstory of it, which I could even get into if we wanted, but they needed they had like severe anxiety, ADHD, all that kind of stuff, and had stopped taking their medicine. So
they were on an improvement plan, and you were there to help.
Yeah.
I can't speak to that.
I have a lot of I have sympathy for that. But yeah, so I don't know. It was a challenging situation. I don't know that we really ever came to a good resolution there. We ended up just the nature of the situation. The teams kind of got reorganized, and it ended up not being I wasn't working with them anymore, so it was fine. But I don't know. I have a big heart, and I always want to figure out how I can help the person, because I had respect for them and thought they were a good developer. They just had a hard time focusing.
I don't think it's imperative that any given two people always work together well. I think it's fine if you discover it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Someone doesn't have to be morally wrong for two people not to work together. It sounds like in your case, it was something where either the two of you just didn't work well together. You didn't jive for some reason, to be a personality or code style or whatever, or maybe they just kind of were a lackey, and what do you do?
Yep.
You want to hear my bad experience?
Yes. Oh yeah, because there's so many good ones. I've heard people talk about smelly, if you're in the same office, one person's breath smells, all kinds of good stuff.
So this is where I invited a person to pair program, and it somehow became a very offensive gesture. So on Twitter, which we all know is where sane, rational people communicate effectively and kindly, Chris.
I'm kind of a jerk on Twitter sometimes.
So this person tweets at me and says, "Hey, thanks for recommending Git. That's the Git platform that I use. Really liked it." And I don't remember what it was in regards to, but somehow we had a tweet back and forth. And then I was having a really good time doing some pairing with a friend, and no, actually, it wasn't that. It wasn't that yet. I ended up pairing with him later on something different. But I was just I was in a mode where it's I know I need to get this done. This is some open source work, and I'm half motivated to do it, but I just need a little extra motivation. If I had somebody to talk through the problem with and figure out how what the right solution would be for this patch, it would help me get motivated, and I'd get it done. So because this person had said, "Hey, thanks for the recommendation," I tweeted out, and I was like, "Yeah, you're welcome." And this was a couple days later, but I just remembered it. So I'm like, "Yeah, you're welcome." And I'm about to do some work on the authentication UX for this. And if you'd like to pair, I'd love to do that. And the person said something back it's the weekend. And then I said something back "real coders code on the weekend," hashtag weekend warrior, some stupid thing like that I thought was clear that it was I was just teasing. And then the person got really offended, and there might have been a couple more tweets. I may be omitting something where I did something that was obviously offensive or wrong. I don't feel like I did, the person like like it just started to be this like, why can't you take a hint? No means no, back off. Like, I don't know what you're assuming from my previous tweet with you, da-da-da. And I'm like, whoa, you are taking offense where none was intended. Like I was reaching out, just trying to be friendly. And,
so many, I don't know. I wish healthcare would just provide like free therapy to everyone.
Well, I think it could have been like a cultural problem. Like this person, I think, was from Australia, and there's different phrases that we use that can sometimes mean different things or come off as more aggressive or like polite ways to say no. Like I hate polite ways to say no. No is the most polite way to say no. I'm not interested is the most polite way to say I'm not interested. Anyone who tells you otherwise is an idiot, and you should fire them.
I actually spent some time in Australia, and I always found them more direct than we are here. So I actually find that kind of interesting.
Well, he became very direct, but I don't know. It was so strange to me because I thought this is just a friendly gesture. And, I didn't feel like I asked twice per se, but like after he said like, no, I said, oh, well, if you ever want to do it, just let me know. I'd totally because it sounded like, because some people have what do they call it? The imposter syndrome, where they're like, oh, well, I'm not a really good coder, therefore, like I wouldn't be valuable to you kind of thing versus, so just like kind of leaving the door open to be like, oh, I'm fine if you're not really good at it. Like I just want someone to pair with. Anyway, it was a weird situation. It made me feel bad in the sense that, I don't know, I guess my feelings were hurt. I was kind of confused. I thought I did a nice gesture and
that's the worst. Like when you think you're doing something nice and it totally like gets interpreted as you being a jerk.
Yeah, but then because I was a little offended, then I was, I don't know, maybe a little passive aggressive in one of my comments, and I shouldn't have done that. But I don't know. I was caught off guard, and I just felt bad both ways. But I think you can be successful in tagging people that are interested in one of the projects you're doing on Twitter and asking them to pair a program. I don't think that's universally how things would generally go. But in this particular case, and I tagged somebody else in a GitHub issue, and they were willing to, but our time zones didn't match out. But it was somebody that was in a related issue to one of the threads of a patch I was working on. And I was like, hey, if you're free today, I actually want to work on this. And that seemed like a very friendly conversation, and it would have gone well if it weren't for the time zones just being out of alignment. That's my horror story. It's not that bad. But.
So we had talked a little pre-show about like pairing in the interview process.
Oh, yeah.
Tangentially touched on it a little bit while we were chatting, but is that an area we wanted to explore at all?
Yeah, let's go into that. Oh, man. So there's people who say like, it's a pairing interview, but let's get real. Most of the time, pairing interviews are not pairing interviews. There's like, you're driving, doing everything, and the interviewer is like watching you, and it is the most nerve-wracking experience in the entire world.
I've got a horror story here that I think is pretty common.
This actually happened to me, and they're like, oh, no, it's just relax. We just want to kind of like check out your vibe and see how we'll work well together. And it's like, well, you guys aren't like doing anything.
To me, this is more like this isn't called pairing. This is more like an individual performance review. Like it reminds me of skating, where I like take the ice and I have like a panel of judges and everyone's like critiquing my every move. But which is fine. It is what it is. We all know like interviewing is broken, but let's not call it pairing interview if it's not truly a pairing interview.
As the interviewer, if you're a new interviewer, you got to have the perspective of people are not going to relax no matter how much you tell them to relax, and they're probably going to perform worse in this, environment they're not accustomed to than they would normally. And I think it's a good thing to give people the option of a take-home assignment as well, because you get to see, or in tandem, because you get to see what they're really capable of, not how they fumble over their words and their thoughts when they're under pressure.
I love that idea. I don't think anybody has ever done that, where you have the option of doing take home or, I'm not going to call it pairing, or like live code in front of people. Depending on my circumstances, I typically prefer the let's just block off an hour or two of time and just do it, because I get extremely busy. Like I have my job and then I have a million other things on top of that, speaking and the podcast and life things. And so I can't always like block out a huge portion of time to do a take-home assignment. Because to me, a take-home assignment isn't just like solve this problem. It's get the build system in place, add all the tests, add functional tests, add unit tests. Unless it's like a take-home assignment of like just a single function or like a collection of methods to try to do a task. That's more reasonable. But anyways, yeah, pairing in interviews, I've had one good situation where the person doing the interview like kind of started and then they had me finish, and that helped me feel a little bit more comfortable. I also think I've had interviews and I've been, the interviewer and the interviewee, where I think it's really valuable if someone is doing well or someone just does one positive thing to make sure that you acknowledge that, because it helps put the interviewee at ease to know, just like the positive feedback on both ends. Because like as the interviewee, everyone tells us that we should be vocal and share our thought process, but it can be really, really hard if the interviewer is just like stone cold silent.
Yeah, that's a tactic too. I remember from my time in HR, I used to talk to recruiters about stuff like this, and they do that for this BS reason of wanting to see how you perform under pressure. And it's like, yeah, but this doesn't really simulate how I would actually perform under pressure in like a real world kind of. The HR recruiting process is just such a hot mess. It's just fundamentally broken.
I have another story about interviewing, and honestly, like this just turned me off from the entire interview process. Where
did he ask you for dinner, Aimee? Is that what he did?
No.
That would happen to Aimee. That would.
I would have.
No, like I appreciated that they reached out to like help me prep for the interview process. But as I gained more information about the interview process, I just thought, I don't know if this is really a place where I would want to work. Like they specifically told me to spend a couple weeks on, I might have been like Code Wars or something like that, which is cool. I don't mind that at all. But they specifically said time yourself and see how fast you can go. And that's the part that like gave me pause. Like I know as developers, we have a job to do, and usually like we can't take forever, because like time will fill the work will fill the amount of time allotted. So we can't take forever. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know if I want to work in a code base where time is something that is like always in the back of the engineer's mind and they're having to like rush through things.
Everyone knows, Aimee, you get the most business value when people know that every second counts.
It just, I don't know, like I don't want to work in a code base that has been built around that, and B, I don't want to work in that environment because
they wouldn't have semicolons. They would have saved on all those paper presses. I don't want to work in that code base either.
I know for a fact I'm not going to do my best job when I'm under pressure, like time pressure like that. Now, maybe I should have asked more clarifying questions from the person that was reaching out to like prep me for the process. Like, I think a better way to go about it would have been like, why don't you work on Code Wars, and if you do 5 problems, one of the problems, time yourself to see how fast you can go. Like, that's reasonable because sometimes you do have to move fast, but just like flat out if it's all about timing myself, like maybe even a better answer would have been like, do Code Wars and add some tests. Like, it's just not, I'm ranting now, but yeah, you can see why I have very strong feelings. And I was pretty excited about the interview process there. And that just completely turned me off from it.
One of the things I've learned to get better at as I've gotten more seasoned, a little grayer around the beard, is starting to pay more attention to the cues companies give you during the hiring process about how terrible or not they're going to be to actually work for.
Yeah.
It's subtle. It's like it's a fine art. They never come out and tell you we're a terrible place to work. But I mean, some of them do, but they generally don't. It's usually like there's subtle cues that after a while you start to learn like the code words for like, you know, able to work under like tight deadlines means like you're constantly going to be stressed out.
Yes. God,
like
no, please.
As somebody who's interviewing, I would say, and not the smaller the company, I think the easier this is, and the larger the company, perhaps the harder this is. But look for what you get as well as for what you want. Because sometimes you find during these experiences with people that they have a skill that you didn't pick them for on their resume that's going to be valuable in a different way that might not be directly related to, like perhaps, for example, perhaps they're not that great of a coder, but maybe they're a really, really good monkey thought translator, you know, or something like that, where you thought you needed to hire a senior programmer, but maybe what you got is a mid-level programmer, but somebody that's really good at understanding what other people say and tying them together, something like that, you know, and that could actually bring a lot of business value. And it might be something you didn't anticipate needing, but once you see it, if you can recognize it, you might. And that, I mean, that's sorry. This is totally tangent from the real topic of the show, but I just want to throw that out there. I think that's important. I had 2 horror stories, one of which is kind of tangential. One of is more like on point. So I'm going to start with that one first. So I did a interview with someone where I was supposed to interview with one person, and I said, "Oh, yeah, I know him. It'll be good to talk with him again." And then I got an email back like, "Oh, so that there's no conflict of interest, we're actually switching you to interview with this person instead." And then when the interview comes, I thought I was going to be interviewing for one position, and the person that was interviewing me thought I was going to be interviewing for another position. And then we decided that the best thing to do with our mixed expectations was to do a little bit of this live coding, which wasn't supposed to be pair programming, but turned into do it my way pair programming, where I started out, like, I do really poorly with contrived code problems anyway. Like, if you give me a real world problem, because I'm very much a user experience type person. So when I understand the real world use case, I envision the code, right? But it was one of these contrived type of problems, and I didn't realize that he was going to try to evaluate me on performance. I thought this was just going to be evaluating on thinking through the problem. And so I'm writing out the solution. He's like, "Well, is that the fastest way to do it?" I'm like, "Well, no." And he's like, "What's the fastest way to do it?" I'm like, "Well, I wasn't really thinking about it from the perspective of the fastest way. I was thinking about it from the perspective of solving the problem that is at hand. And then, you know, we can go back and optimize it first." And he kept on like pushing me to like, "Well, why are you doing this? Why are you using an array rather than a hash object?" And it like, ultimately I got to a point where I was like, "Look, I need you to stop telling me how to do this. Let me work through my solution the way that I would work through it. And then afterwards, once I know that I have understood the problem well enough to create a solution that is a correct solution, I'm more than happy to go back and then fine tune it and optimize it." And he just like, that interview didn't go well. But he like,
that wouldn't work well for me either though, AJ. Like,
he wanted me to come up with like his specific solution that he already knew the answer to. And for me, like, I needed to first understand the problem and know that I solved the problem correctly. Then going back and optimizing is pretty easy. You know, that was just this thing where he kept on asking me questions and like, "Why don't you do this way? Why don't you do that?" It was like the worst type of pair programming.
Does not sound fun.
Yeah. And then I met him in person, because this was online. I met him in person, and I was like, "Oh yeah, you interviewed me. That was the worst interviewing experience I've ever had. That really went poorly. That wasn't scheduled well, and the evaluation was way off." He's like, "Oh, it's okay. You can try again in 6 months."
What?
that was his response? Wow. What a putz.
I mean, like, I'm not quoting directly, but I said something to that effect, and he definitely did say, "Well, we allow candidates to retry after 6 months," was part of his answer to it. Yes.
I just don't want to work in a place where people are like arrogant.
I don't think he was arrogant as much as I don't think he understood. I don't think the communication happened then either. He may have been really arrogant, but it didn't come across as arrogant. It came across as if like he missed it.
I always say like dodged a bullet.
Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans, and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 40 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/JavaScript Jabber.
Are we wanting to go to picks?
Yes.
Sounds like you're ready to go first.
No, I was going to say yes, but someone who's ready needs to go first.
Chris, you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I can go first. So 2 for me this week. The first, I want to give a shout out to this company called Enso. I actually don't know how to pronounce it. Rings. I got too fat for my wedding band. And we were down in Florida not too long ago. And with the humidity and everything, like my fingers swelled up so much that it was like cutting into my skin and just like really uncomfortable. But I don't like the idea of like just not having one on. And I didn't want to drop a couple $100 on a replacement or get my own resized when I'm hoping at some point to like slim down a little bit and not have such pudgy little fingers and fit into my original wedding band. So they make these really cool, pretty affordable silicone rings that they have a little bit of stretch and give to them. They're super lightweight and comfortable. They come in some traditional colors, but also a bunch of like really fun colors and styles if that's more your thing. And I've been really, really happy with it so far. It fits my meaty little fingers perfectly. So highly recommend them. And then the other thing, just kind of as a personal project for me, I just launched this new thing. So I mentioned earlier on the show, I run this training program called the Vanilla JavaScript Academy. But it is a little expensive and it's really intense. It's like super time consuming. 8 weeks.
That guy, the Vanilla JS guy, that's you?
I know, shocking, right? So it's like 8 really intense weeks of project-based work. And the thing people love about it is that it's project-based, but a lot of folks just don't have the time or sometimes the money to make the investment to do it. So I created this new monthly project video series where if you want to get the same kind of thing, but you don't want to spend as much kind of like time on it, every month you can get access to a couple of new JavaScript projects where I give you some starter templates, I tell you what we're going to try and do, and then you can either run off and do it on your own and then come back and watch a video of me working through the problem, or you can watch that first if you're like really stuck. But the videos are also completely unscripted, so I don't actually try and solve it ahead of time. I come up with a project and then try and figure it out in real time and record myself. So there's a lot of like bugs and backtracking and live debugging that happens, which I've heard from folks is also kind of useful to see. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, head over to vanillajsprojects.com to learn more about that. So far, I've been pretty happy with it. We're working on some really cool projects, and I think you might like it. And yes, I am, believe it or not, I apparently do stuff with vanilla JavaScript now. Who knew? That's it for me this week.
AJ, your turn.
All right. So my wife and I have had this problem where for our wedding, we got this salt and pepper grinder set that's really tall. And at first it seemed like it was too big. Because
the tyranny of large salt and pepper shakers. Who has not been there before?
So not shakers, grinders, okay?
Oh, yes, sorry.
And Costco has grinders, but they're not in a set, like the pepper's one way and the salt's the other way, where like one is right side up and the other's upside down. I can't stand for that. Anyway, they're a little too large, but it turns out that she loves to use them for cooking because they're so large, for some reason, it just, I don't know, makes it more awesome to grind it right over top of the frying pan or whatever. Well, the problem is this. I'm a man who likes salt at the table, Like I need to have salt at the table. And since this was a set, I kept on putting those back over towards the table, and I do other things like got her a bowl of salt. I got her a salt shaker. I got her so now there's like 3 or 4 other types of salt, but she always went back to the big grinders. And so finally I realized I'm solving the problem the wrong way. And the problem is there's so much variety in this particular area that I didn't make a decision and I stalled on it. But finally I made my decision. I got a smaller salt and pepper grinder set that are a little bit more well suited for the table in the first place. And I told her that these must stay here. Absolute must, non-negotiable. These do not leave the dinner table because salt and pepper deserve to be at the dinner table. And you can do whatever you want with the other grinders now. Just don't touch mine off of this table. And I'm not that authoritarian about many things, but my salt's important to me. So now we have 2 sets, and I like them both. And so I'm going to link to those, because if you've got that problem where, one of you is hogging the salt over at the stove.
This literally does happen to us. I know I was picking on you, but this is legitimately a problem that I have too.
Yeah, so I'm gonna link both the tall set and the short set, and one of them has an option for like a medium set as well. But so you can go with either style, but and you can get now the flavor's not any different. Don't let people tell you that there's some sort of weird health benefit or the flavor's superior with the charcoal salt versus the Himalayan salt versus the white salt. It's all about what color complements your kitchen table best. It has no difference other than that. I promise you. Science can prove it.
Have you tried all 3 of them though, AJ?
I have tried different salts. There's a store in Williamsburg, Virginia that has like 20 different salts. They're all the same. They taste like salt. Anyway, but I am a fan of the multi-flavor peppercorn. So I'm going to link all that to you. God bless. That's my pick for today.
AJ, my favorite thing about your picks is that they always come with a story. And I'm not being facetious here. I always I learn a little bit more about the life of AJ with every pick.
And that's why people watch the show. They turn on YouTube and fire up JavaScript Jabber so they can watch me talk about these things.
Aimee, you're up.
I'm so excited about a couple of things this week that I think I'm going to save my programming picks and go with these. So the first one, things are winding down for me and at NPM, so I have a little bit of extra time on the weekends, and I've been dying to take the Enneagram test, which it takes a little bit of time. So I finally gave in and did that last weekend. And very interesting to note. Let's see. What did I put in here? So it looks like I'm an 8. And so if people haven't done this, I think it's really, really, really interesting. I love doing different personality tests and stuff like that. So that was cool. And then the other thing I'm going to do, as you guys can probably hear jingling in the background, I went shopping this weekend too, and I bought my cats some new collars because they've tore up the ones that they were wearing. And these are special, instead of being fabric, they're plastic, so that if a cat scratches it, they don't tear it up. And so they didn't have them at the store, but I had to order them online, but somebody told me about them at the store. So, because I went to go get them new ones, but you can get them on Amazon, and they're from Kitty Rama, but I'll put links to both of this stuff in the show notes. And I think that's going to be it for me. And I guess with that said, it is time to wrap up, and we will catch y'all next week. Bye.
Cheers.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.
Do you guys have strong opinions on grills?
Grills?
Yeah, my grill is a decade old and starting to fall apart, and I need a new one.
Don't get charcoal.
No, it's always gas, but infrared wasn't really a thing when I bought mine, and I don't know if that's worth. AJ, you're really into the science and engineering of stuff. Is infrared just hype, or is it actually worth it? Mr. Solder JS over here.
Let me give you my professional opinion as someone who's never done any research into it nor has a particular interest in grilling it.
This is exactly the kind of opinion I was looking for. That's perfect.
Yeah, excellent. So when you think about visible light, you notice you put your hand in front of the sun, your hand blocks the sun's rays. Now, infrared light is different because you put your hand in front of the sun, you can't see the infrared light, but the cancer cells in your body can. So the infrared light is really instrumental not only in giving you cancer, but also in making the cells jiggle in weird ways. Now, since the beef is dead, this is okay. It's completely safe. It's not going to give you any more cancer unless you burn the beef, because as we all know, burned meat is a carcinogen. But it's going to be more helpful in the cases in which the thickness of the beef corresponds to the wavelength of the particular infrared to give you the best searing, flip over flop.
How is it possible that this is your opinion with having done no research? Because what you just said is somewhat consistent with some of the actual research I've actually done.
Well, I made it up just like you did.
Oh, the wavelength thing actually did come up. Like specifically, like I think it was Charboil. Their wavelengths are not like the right one to give you the kind of cook you want or something. Like AJ, you're a genius, man.
Thank you.
And the most polite Twitter user I've ever met.